Hey guys, welcome back to another video. One of the most important things in a chess game is to maintain your focus and keep your mind sharp throughout the course of the entire game. As much as chess is a game of logic, preparation, spatial reasoning, etc., it's also very much so a psychological game. And throughout the course of a game, there's many ways that you can lose focus, that many players often do lose focus. For example, if you make a mistake, it's easy to kind of beat yourself up and kind of check out for the rest of the game. A lot of times, if you're way ahead in the game, you expect your opponents to roll over, and if they don't, sometimes that causes panic. If your opponent is pressuring you with lots of dangerous moves, sometimes you get fatigued and tired of thinking of all the possible lines, etc. And those are just a couple examples. Another one is tunnel visioning, which happens to me, happens to a lot of chess players, where you become fixated on a specific plan and you're not really organically playing the board or what's actually going on. Today I wanted to go over one of my recent games, which I think highlights some of these concepts pretty well. And there's a lot to be learned from some of the mistakes made, like every other game. So I started with the black pieces here, and my opponent plays d4, d5, and e4 is played. So once your opponent tries to take the center, you can't allow them to do this. You have to take back here. You don't want to let them get away with e4 and d4. That's basically the whole point of playing d5 against d4. So I went ahead and took the pawn here, and we made a couple developing moves, and my opponent played f3, and this is known as the Blackmar gambit. So I don't really want to, defend this pawn any further. I'm just going to go ahead and take the extra pawn that they're offering me, that my opponent's offering me. So they take back with the queen, actually. And I was expecting them to take back with the knight because that is the main line of this gambit opening. But they went ahead and took back with the queen. So now I'm up a pawn here, and, because this is a gambit, I'm just slightly worried. I'm wary of the fact that they're going to be probably mounting or trying to mount an attack on my king early on in the game and get some initiative against me. So I start tunnel visioning a little bit. My goal here is to just get my king out of danger, just get my king castled, which is an opening principle and it's important. But notice for a couple moves here, I missed an even better move. So let's see, he plays a3, and I play bishop to e7. Both of these moves that I made previously, I could have just taken this free pawn. Typically, if the knight's taking this, this pawn is guarded. But since the queen took back, this pawn is just a free pawn for the taking. So my moves weren't necessarily terrible moves or bad moves, but this is an example of tunnel visioning in action. So, okay, they keep developing, and I get my king to safety. Castle's queen side, I notice that the rook is already in the middle of the board and ready to attack here. So I continue to develop, and he plays d5. And one of the first things you learn, I guess, as you're playing chess is you don't really want to take or attack squares or pawns here, in this case, if your opponent has the same number of defenders as you have attackers. And this is something I noticed pretty early on, or right after this move was made, and I considered this to be an issue, especially if I take here, he takes back with his knight, and let's say I take with my knight. When the rook takes back, he's going to be attacking my queen. So I didn't really want to go ahead and with that continuation. So I took the pawn, he took with the knight, and I played bishop to g4. And my idea was if I could dislodge this queen from attacking this square, then I would remove one of the defenders of that square, and then I'd be able to win the exchange here. But there's a pretty fatal flaw or obvious flaw with this move here. So if you were white, why don't you pause the video for a few seconds and think of what white would play here. Think of how you can perhaps capitalize on the move that I have just made to win some material. And I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, so the answer is knight takes on f6. So the issue is the knight takes the knight, hitting me with check. So I have to respond to the check. And in that same process, he's removing the defender of my bishop. And that's an issue because once I have to respond and take back, I'm not going to take back with my pawn. That's just leaving my king wide open. So I go ahead and take back with the bishop, but now this queen gets to just capture my bishop. So my opponent is now up an entire piece. And, it's a pretty blatant error, I guess, or simple error that I've made. And, oftentimes players kind of check out here and they say, how could I possibly have missed that? How bad am I at this game, or whatever it is. And they kind of just, go on autopilot for the rest of the game. But it's important here to keep focused and make sure you make life as difficult as you can for your opponent throughout the rest of the game. So obviously, after this whole set of moves, my queen has been under attack. So once he trades captures there, I have to move my queen out of the way, and I move while also attacking his bishop on e3. And instead of moving the bishop back, or either this way or this way, let's say, my opponent gets very aggressive and plays bishop to h6. It seems like a very threatening move, but we have to maintain our focus here. So this pawn is pinned, so this pawn cannot take the bishop, and he's got a double attack here, which, given the right opportunity or the right circumstances, that's just straight up checkmate in one move. But is there actually really a threat here at the moment? And the answer right now is no, because I have this bishop on f6, and this bishop's defending the square as well as the king. So there's not really a threat here, so it's important to recognize that and not freak out. Obviously, when white makes this move, it's a little bit preemptive because all of his queenside pieces still really haven't gotten into the game. If he ever has to move this queen, well, I'm going to just recapture the bishop. So it's a little bit double-edged, I would say. So I'm not really reacting to this threat in any way because right now it's not that much of a threat. I feel comfortable at this time with what's going on. So I want to challenge the open d file here. Again, because a lot of his pieces aren't developed. If I take this rook here, if he doesn't respect this, let's say, and he takes back with the queen, well, then I get to capture the bishop. If he takes back with the king, then I get to develop another rook and hit that king with check. Oops. And hit that king with check after that exchange, and I feel pretty comfortable with this. So, typically you don't want to trade down when you're losing, but I feel fairly comfortable because my pieces seem more organized here and in better positions moving forward with the game. So instead of taking my rook or trading and whatnot, he plays bishop to d3, kind of blocking this attack. When I checked back at the engine here, they thought this was a slight mistake, or even more than a slight mistake. And it's kind of unclear to me. It's hard to say exactly why, but what this does allow me to do is I played knight to e5 here. So I'm double attacking, and obviously he has to respect this as I'm attacking the queen here. And this is a good move, and there's really only one very solid move for white here. And there's a lot of moves that would be considered mistakes. So let's say you were white and or your opponent had played knight to e5 here. What do you think, just as a quick quiz, what do you think move you would play here? And I'll give you a few seconds again just to think about this for a bit and see if you can figure out the importance of the queen being on this file, which I've already mentioned. So I think the best move by far for white is just pushing the queen back to g3, because we're still maintaining the pin at that point. It's very important for the queen to stay on this file, because otherwise this bishop is just going to be hanging. So, and let's say even if he moves back here, I'm going to take the bishop, let's say, and after he retakes with the pawn, it's possible I can create some opportunities for checks with my queen, etc. Things like that. So I'm feeling pretty good about this move, even if he goes back, but he doesn't find that move, unfortunately. So what my opponent does instead is bishop sacrifice, attacking my pawn on h7 with check. And again, there's a whole bunch of pieces surrounding my king here, but it's important to keep your cool and ask yourself what is really being threatened here. So I'm going to go ahead and take this guy because, again, this queen and this bishop are not really a threat still. So I take the bishop, and now he still has 2 pieces under attack. My knight is still attacking the queen, and now since my king has moved out of the way, this pawn is no longer pinned. So this pawn can go ahead and take this bishop at any moment now. So he can't save both of these pieces at the same time. So he hits my king with another check on f5, but I grab the other bishop on h6 with my king. So now I'm the one who's up material. And my king is slightly vulnerable, so this game is, is far from over, but that was a bit of an ill-fated couple of moves for white there. White hits me with another queen check, and I bring my king to g6. So since he really doesn't have many of these other pieces in the game, he can't really threaten checkmate at this moment. But my king is vulnerable, so. And my opponent plays knight to f3. And since I'm up material now, and since I'm trying to kind of diffuse tension and things of that, like that, I'm more than willing to trade my knight. Although it opens up this file for the rook. So that is one thing I'm a little bit worried about. This queen's already covering here. If this rook moves here, he's going to hit me with a check, and it's going to get uncomfortable pretty quickly. So there's been this tension the entire time between these 2 rooks. And after he recaptures, I'm just continuing to trade down and trying to get into an endgame where I'm just up a bishop. So he takes with the king. I activate this rook in a central open file with check, and he moves his king away. And I bring my queen up to e3 with check. So I am hitting him with another check, but the main purpose of the move from me, my thought process here was, I don't want to allow this rook to get to g1. So obviously, if he moves the rook there now, I'm just going to capture it. So I'm kind of cutting off at least that resource from him. And he simply moves the king away after the check. And now I run into another tunnel visioning issue. So I want to get my king out of this danger area. My thought was, let me get this bishop out, let me move this pawn and kind of sneak my king onto f7, kind of away from danger, or so I thought. There's a pretty obvious drawback to this, which is that I am creating a pin on this bishop if this file is taken up by either the queen or the rook. So it's usually not a good idea to create pins on your king like that with your pieces, but let's see what happens. So instead of moving the rook on this file, he brings the queen over, again creating a pin. And I move my queen back to f4. And guess what? I just want to trade. I'm up the bishop. It's my goal. I want to get these queens off the board and breathe a little bit easier for the rest of this game. But of course, my opponent doesn't want to allow me to do that since I'm up in material. So he moves all the way back. And I think this is a free pawn. So I go ahead and take the pawn. I feel fairly comfortable, but let's see if you can capitalize with white for the, I guess, 3rd time in this game. Pretend you're white here. What move do you think is the best for white to play after I capture the pawn on f3? Give it a few seconds, and I will get back to you in a bit. It may have something to do with the pins that I've been mentioning the last couple seconds. So the move that white played, which is a great move, is pawn h4. Still pinned. So this pawn move, once he makes this pawn move, I cannot move my bishop out of the way. So I'm going to have to sacrifice that bishop. So I play f6, just defending the square. He captures the bishop, and I recapture. But, okay, I'm still up a little bit. We both have queens, we both have rooks, but I do have 2 pawns here. They are doubled, but this pawn, specifically on g5, is a passed pawn. There are no pawns impeding his progress to become a queen on the other side of the board. So that's a pretty big, it's a pretty big advantage that I have still, even after that mistake. So my opponent plays queen to h2, doubling up on this file. I think he's probably looking to maybe hit me with a check or something, but I'm not sure his purpose. But I saw this and I saw another opportunity to trade down pieces, which I'm more than happy to do, especially with this pass pawn. So he takes one of the defenders off this back rank. So I play rook to d1 check. And obviously this rook is defended, and it's also attacking his rook on h1 and delivering check. He has to take this rook. If he doesn't take the rook, I'm going to just win his rook. So since I'm also attacking that square with my queen as well. So he has to accept this trade, and I recapture with check. And his king only got one move here. And now this gets a little bit funky because I get a little bit confused. I don't have a lot of time left, and I'm not really sure exactly how to close this game out. I hit him with another check. He defends with his pawn, and I just start pushing my pawn, which is fine. What do you do with pass pawns? You push pass pawns. So as long as this guy's not under attack, I push him. So that's what I did. Now I am dropping a pawn here, which I won't lie, I didn't actually realize. I was tunnel visioning again, kind of just trying to get this pawn promoted. But okay, he'd go ahead and takes the pawn, and I play queen to g5. Now, if you're in an endgame with rooks, it's often a really great idea to put your rook behind the pawn. Since this is not a rook, it's a queen, you can tend to be more active with your queen. I don't have to just stick her behind this pawn. I can be more active, and also I can more actively attempt to trade down my queens. So considering this pass pawn, if I was able to get rid of these queens, get these queens off the board, this king is so far away for white, there's no way he's going to be able to chase me down. This should be an easy win. So this would have been a great opportunity for me to play here. If I play queen to c6 here, I'm offering the trade of queens, I'm defending this pawn, and I'm also threatening to take another pawn with check. So it would have really forced the issue for him. But I put the queen behind the pawn. Not the best move. He captures another pawn, and I'm just chugging along with this passed pawn here. And he puts his queen behind the pawn. And what I'm trying to do now is get my king close enough to defend my queen so that I can force another trade in this area before this king has a chance to march all the way down and get into the action here. So he starts his march, because this is the point of contention here. And I bring my king here, and my goal is to go here. So if I'm able to get this move off, I'm hitting him with check, attacking the queen, who's undefended, and he has no choice. But he starts hitting me with checks because my king's a little bit vulnerable here. So continuing to hit me with checks, a little bit, he could drag this game on a lot. He could also possibly force some stalemates, considering how far forward my king was, which was not ideal either. But he hits me with f1 check, and this is exactly what I wanted, because now I can block with the queen, and notice now I'm blocking his check, and I'm also attacking his king with check. So because there's this check situation, if he simply moves his king out of the way because of the check, I'm going to win his queen. So doesn't really have an option here. He has to take. Or he doesn't take. He blocks because I guess he's trying to set up his own pass pawn here. But I'm fine with that. All I want to do is trade my queens with this pawn here. So I trade the queens, and now it's just a matter of getting my pawn over to this file and promoting, and then it's a pretty easy victory from here. But there's a couple mistakes in here. Obviously, there's mistakes in every game. I think I was able to pull this one out because I was able to maintain my focus, I think, a little bit better than my opponent, especially after I make this initial mistake here. You know, I kept my cool for the most part, and I think he got a little aggressive. He didn't finish developing his pieces before he started getting a little bit too aggressive, and I was able to capitalize on that with better coordinated pieces, better active pieces, and I was able to close this game out. So again, I think it's a good example of some of the ways in which you can lose focus or keep your mind sharp throughout the course of a game. And that's all for me, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks.